All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you are here joining us today. My name is Stephanie, and I'll be one of your co-hosts. Today's webinar is a part of our BrainHQ Academy series, where we talk about the neuroscience behind different topics. Today's topic is going to be how staying socially engaged improves brain health. So let's go ahead and go over the agenda for today. After this intro, we're going to actually kick off with a pretty quick activity here. We are going to be using the poll option. So when that poll comes up, go ahead and submit your answer. There are going to be 3 questions, each of which are going to be single choice. After that, Dr. Henry Monka is going to go ahead and take over and give us a presentation about social engagement and the effects of that on your brain. Now, for those of you who maybe are joining us for the first time, Dr. Henry Monka is a returning host to the webinar series. He earned his PhD in neuroscience at the University of California, San Francisco, and that's where he studied brain plasticity with our co-founder and guest star for today, Dr. Michael Merzenich. So speaking of Mike is going to be joining Henry in conversation about social engagement following that presentation. And then towards the end of the webinar today, we are going to be moving to a Q&A section. Now, if you have any questions throughout the duration of the presentation, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box there. Click the Q&A box, a little window should pop up where you can type in your question, and I'll do my best to field those as we go. Now, the last thing that I wanted to mention is that today's webinar is being recorded and it will get posted to our YouTube channel probably sometime next week. If you'd like to be notified when that video goes live, you can go to youtube.com/BrainHQ to subscribe to our YouTube channel there to be notified when that video goes up. Also, everyone who is registered for this webinar today will receive an email sometime next week with any follow-up resources that we may mention, but that will also include a link to the replay. All right, so Henry and Mike, you have given us some details for a game called 2 Truths and a Lie that we want to play with our audience today.
All right.
Yeah, so just for a little bit of context and a little bit of background, 2 Truths and a Lie, if you aren't aware, is sort of like an icebreaker game that you play at parties or mixers when you want to get to know other people in the room. The idea is each person says 3 statements about themselves, and 2 of those statements are true, and then 1 of those is going to be a lie, and everybody has to guess which of those statements is the lie. I guess I'll go ahead and start first with my
Let's hear it, Stephanie. Let's pretend.
Yeah, my 2 truths and a lie here.
We all just met. We were at a volunteering event or our local community center. We don't quite know each other, and hey, let's play a little game and get to know each other a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so
about yourself.
Yeah, so I will say the first thing is that I don't like spicy food. My second statement is I have a motorcycle license. And my third is that I am a woodworking hobbyist.
Okay, now are Mike and I going to guess yours right away? Is that how we're going to do this, or are we going to do all 3 of us first?
Let's go through all 3 first and then launch the poll, and then we can all talk through these together.
Okay. All right. Well, here's my 3. I'm thinking about you, and I know you a little bit, but I will have to say, Mike, we're going to have to work at this. None of those are obvious to me. Here's 3 things to know about me, and 1 of them is a lie, and 2 of them are truths. I once flew on a private jet. I once traveled all the way around the globe, and I once starred on a QVC home shopping show on national television. I'll let you ponder that.
That's fun. I'm going to have fun thinking about that one.
Okay.
Mike, what about you? What are your 3 statements you want to share?
I hardly ever tell a lie, not more than once or twice a day. But
sure.
my first thing that I did is I once made headlines in the local newspaper by setting off a bomb in my hometown. I was once the valedictorian of my university college class. And I once was assigned the job for more than a year of milking a cow as a lad. And so one of those is not true.
All right. So let's go ahead and
plausible, though.
Yeah. I have an idea of which one might be the lie, but then that leaves me questioning the story behind what I think is the truth.
All right, let's get to know each other a little bit. So it looks like the poll is up and people are guessing. And then shall we guess amongst? We'll let the poll go, and then we'll guess amongst ourselves real quick.
Yeah. Do we want to
Okay.
like take a second to cross interrogate or like do cross examination of each other's statements?
Well, Stephanie, I do think of you as a strong, like hobbyist, crafty person. So that woodworker thing is at least plausible to me. But
Mhm.
you might have hidden talents around the motorcycle riding and the spicy food side food. So it's an open question.
Yeah, I was, man. So I don't want to say what answer I think for you just yet, Henry, but I have a very, very vague recollection of like a family background on the East Coast, and that is making me think of one answer in particular more than others. Um,
Okay.
and for Mike, there's one that I definitely don't want to be a lie because I need the story for it.
Yeah, I want to hear about the bomb.
Yeah, I also want to hear about that.
And
Well,
I'll say
you guys are easy to fool.
I'll say that Mike, a little bit of a troublemaker as a youth, as I recall the story. So
Well, I know Stephanie's pretty spicy, so I don't know about the spicy food thing. I kind of believe that would be hard to deny, but I'm not sure. And as for you, Henry, I don't know about this QVC home shopping thing. I mean, come on.
That's the one I think that I believe actually quite a lot. I don't know what you would have been selling on QVC, maybe like one of our old CD-ROM programs or something, but there is like you have a very good way of doing sales pitches, and I believe you could have been okay on on QVC.
all right, shall we see what our survey says and give our answer?
Yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and end the poll there and share the results. Okay. So our 2 truths and a lie. So for me, my 3 statements: I don't like spicy food, I have a motorcycle license, and I am a woodworking hobbyist.
Mike, she doesn't like spicy food. That's what I think. I think she's a secret softie.
Mike, what do you think is my lie?
Well, I think you like spicy food, so I think that's your lie.
Yep. So that is correct. I actually love spicy food. So that is my lie. I've had a motorcycle license since I was 20 years old. And I've been woodworking. That was a hobby that came up actually right before the pandemic and then kind of took off during the pandemic.
Okay, learn something every day.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, Henry, what about your statements here?
I did, in fact, star at a QVC home shopping network, and it might be on YouTube somewhere. QVC once upon a time featured the Brain Fitness program back when that was a CD-ROM program, and I traveled out to Pennsylvania and got on TV to do it. It was a fantastic experience.
Absolutely nailed it. Okay, cool. So
I did travel around the entire globe. Right after graduate school, when I finished in your lab, Mike, I got married, and my wife and I took 4 months and lived as backpackers and went west from San Francisco. And I promise you, the earth is actually round. So
see, that's the one I thought was the lie. So that's actually really funny.
Fun trip. But I have never flown in a private jet. Maybe that's still ahead of me, but it hasn't happened yet.
All right. Now, Mike, I think we know which one we want to be true, but which one is the lie?
Well, I'm not seeing my 3 answers here.
You might have to scroll down to see them.
Anyway.
Yeah, you might have to scroll down a little bit there. It looks like half the people think that your lie is that you made headlines in your hometown for setting off a bomb.
Yeah.
About a third of the remaining people think that it's a lie that you were the valedictorian of your university class, which I think I'm also in that camp. I know you were a hyper intelligent man, but you don't have to be a valedictorian to be hyper intelligent and become a neuroscientist. And then the third one, about 14% of people said I was assigned to the job of milking cows when I was a child. I think that's a lie.
Okay, well, first of all, the headline wrote "Mystery Blast Rocks River Park," and my cousin and I, Bill, figured out how to make a bomb. And actually, we made a pipe bomb without actually knowing what it was. We took a pipe, filled it with powder, which we made, black blasting powder, which we manufactured. We screwed caps on the end. We drilled a hole in the side. We put a 30-second wick in. We went and hid behind. We put it in a stump in the city park, and we hid behind a log. And I ran all the way home. I mean, the debris and the dirt flew over our head and the log, and I ran all the way home. It scared the holy hell out of both of us. I was the valedictorian of my college class. And the lie was, we had a milk cow.
Okay.
Actually, we gave up milking our own cow when I was 7 years old, and my hands were still too weak to milk the cow. I tried to milk it a couple of times, but I was actually unable to. So that was a lie.
You
I
were just, you were just a baby and you never had to do that chore, I guess.
Just a baby. Yeah.
Got me on a technicality. I remember you having a cow as a child. I didn't know how old it was when you didn't have the cow anymore.
Yeah, I was just too weak. Too much of a little boy.
Well, I've learned something about both of you already, and this has been a very fun example of great social engagement, even though we've known each other for quite some time. Shall I dive in and talk about what our brains were doing during all of that social engagement work?
Yeah, absolutely. Please take it away, Henry.
Fantastic. Well, hey, that was a very fun introduction. I've known Mike for decades, and Stephanie, I've known you for a number of years now, and I still learned a few things. And hey, that is really the perfect intro to today's talk, where we're going to talk about how staying socially engaged improves brain health. Lots of people enjoy social activity, whether it's with friends or family members, or even just people you're meeting for the first time. But hey, is social engagement more than that? Can social engagement directly affect our brains? Well, to answer this question, we're going to talk about, well, brain plasticity, our very favorite topic here at Posit Science. Brain plasticity refers to the idea that the brain can change itself and rewire itself in response to what happens to us in the world. And let's see if I can get these slides to go. And of course, what that means is the brain builds itself over time. And hey, let's start off by looking at a kid's brain, even a baby's brain. Now, often when we think about how the brain of a child builds itself, we think of all the things the kid does to interact with the world around them, playing with blocks or playing outside or learning how to read or learning how to write, and of course, these things are really important. They do help build the brain of that child and the adult that child becomes. It shapes the brain in response to all that learning and all that interaction with the world. But let's expand the picture just a little bit. Just about all of this brain building activity is often done with help from other people. Kids play with other kids on the playground and at school. Parents teach kids new skills, and grandparents pass on knowledge and wisdom, and usually a few jokes as well along the way. And that means that just an enormous amount of brain building comes from interactions with other people. And the social engagement with those other people is incredibly important to the brain. Let's take the example of this young lady here in the picture, whose brain is being changed as she works on this arts and crafts project with her grandparents. Her brain has to do so much to do this, right? She has to recognize that these are people, right? She has to recognize that these are people that she knows and cares about. She has to figure out, what are these people paying attention to when they look and they point with their fingers? And she has to decode their actions and try and replicate those actions with her own arms and hands. And she has to figure out when she's doing it right because they encourage her, and when she's doing it wrong because they give her some advice. It's a lot for a developing brain, and it shows us just how important social engagement is for the brain. And in fact, if you start off with the basics, you probably know that when you see an image like this little arrangement of colors in a pie chart, that certain parts of your brain, the visual system, will get activated, and that's how you see it. But what if we reorganize these colors just a little bit differently like this? Well, it turns out that with this little change, just a little bit of geometry change, moving those pixels around so that now we see it's a friendly face, that makes an enormous change in brain information processing. Over here on the right, this is a brain activation map, and the colors show us the regions of the brain that are activated more when we see a face instead of just an ordinary object that isn't a face. And you can see how much more gets activated. There's this huge strip down the side of the brain called the STS, the superior temporal sulcus, that leads down from the visual parts of the brain all the way down to the memory parts of the brain, because maybe we want to remember this face. There's a fascinating area down here on the bottom of the brain called the FFA that activates only for very specific faces. Researchers have found neurons that only activate for a spouse or a famous actor. So we can see that social stimuli, like faces, are incredibly stimulating and activating for the brain. Let's go a little bit further. Let's go beyond just looking at a face, even if it's just a very friendly face. Once your brain has processed the faces it sees and the voices it hears, and yes, hearing language is another really important form of social engagement and social cognition. your brain can put it all together and learn from the people around you. That's a pretty advanced form of learning and brain activity and social cognition. Scientists call this observational learning. And it's a very powerful ability, right? We can watch a person do something that we've never seen before, and then we can do it ourselves. Maybe your dad showed you how to fry an egg, or maybe your sister showed you how to parallel park. You probably had to practice to get good at it, but you learned the idea of how it worked just by watching another person do it. That's a lot of brain activity and a lot of learning that goes on by just being in a social situation and watching and listening. It actually involves just about every part of the brain when you do it. And let's go even just a little bit further. Not only can our brains learn from other people, our brains can actually build complete representations, complete models of other people based on what we've learned about them already and what we perceive them as doing right now. This lets us do amazing things. For example, we can understand what emotional state another person is in, whether they're sad or happy or fearful or surprised or cheerful. We can understand what they're going through, which sometimes specifically called sympathy. And we can even feel the experiences that another person is having as if they happen to ourselves, which we sometimes specifically call empathy. And all of this is happening because our brains can put an enormous amount of brain power into understanding social situations, understanding other people's moods, intentions, and their states of mind. Scientists call this mentalizing, and it involves just about the entire brain as well. And we can go even further. What about people actually working together on a project together? Well, it turns out that when we work together, our brains actually get in sync with each other. Here's just a fascinating experiment that was done by a team at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. First, what they did is they had several people and they put them around a table, and each person was asked to work on a little jigsaw puzzle all by themselves. So you see these three hands reaching out, and each one's doing their own puzzle. They didn't need to cooperate. They just had to sit and do their own puzzle together. And then they used an advanced form of brain imaging called functional near-infrared spectroscopy. Now, that's kind of a mouthful, but what it is it's a way of measuring rapid changes in blood flow to specific regions of the brain using a very fancy camera they just put right on top of your scalp. Now, what they saw, if they looked at two people who were not working together, but both each doing their own puzzle, is each of these kind of wiggly lines represents the brain activity of one person, and one's shown in red and one's shown in blue. And you can see that there are periods of time where their brain activities are kind of in sync, but then there's periods where their brain activities pretty much not in sync. And the scientists could quantify this, and they made these nice little images of the brain, and how much the brains are in sync is shown by the color of these lines in different regions. And, most of them are orange or blue. There's a little bit of synchronization, but, not so much. But then they changed the task. They gave people the same puzzle and asked them to work on it together, which is probably how most of us do puzzles when we're sitting around the table from each other. Now these people were doing the same cognitive task, solving the puzzle, but they had to work together to put it together. And the researchers see something that I just frankly think is amazing, which is that the brain activity actually synchronized across these different people. You can see it's much more in sync now. And when the researchers quantified it, as you can see over here on the right, now their measures of synchronization across these different brain regions are almost all red and orange. And that tells us that these brains are working together as the people are working together. And that's just kind of amazing to me. So once again, we see how important social engagement is to brains, and we see just how much of our brain power is responsive to social engagement and how much of our brain power is engaged simply as we engage with other people. So, we see that all of this social engagement is important for the brain, and that's led some scientists to ask a question, have our social environments, things like how many people we're friends with, how many people we know, how many people we work with, has that social environment, affected our brains? And it turns out that many scientists think that the answer is yes. This is a really interesting analysis from a researcher named Dr. Robin Dunbar. He's a scientist at Oxford. And he spent quite a lot of time looking at brain structures across different primate groups, including various different kinds of monkeys and apes. And he came to this really interesting result. And what he found was that the larger the social group that the primate lived in, some monkeys live in a troop of just a few monkeys, and some monkeys and apes live in a troop of 50 or 80 monkeys or apes. if you see the larger that social group is, it turns out the more cerebral cortex, that's that wrinkly part that's on the outside of the brain that many scientists think is responsible for most of what we might call our thinking and our experience. The bigger the social group, the more cerebral cortex we see. And these little triangles show the great apes in particular. We look at gorillas, well, they have relatively small social groups and some cerebral cortex. Chimps have bigger social groups and more cerebral cortex. And humans, well, the largest social groups of all and the most cerebral cortex of all. Now, that's a pretty interesting analysis. Mike and I might talk about this a bit more. I myself am always skeptical of a graph that put humans on the top. Seems pretty sensible, seems pretty self-centered. Maybe if chimpanzee scientists were building this graph, it would look a little bit different. But Dr. Dunbar wrote a pretty interesting book about this thinking. It's called How Many Friends Does One Person Need? And if you're wondering what the answer is, he thinks that our brains limit us to about 150 people that we can know reasonably well, friends and families and coworkers. And more than that, our brains just can't keep up, in his opinion. So maybe this kind of social engagement has driven our brain size over the thousands of years that, we've evolved as different from chimps and gorillas. But, we probably care about what social engagement can do for our brain health right now. So can social engagement change our brain structure over a quicker time frame? Well, some researchers in Korea say that the answer is yes. This is a fascinating study where these researchers worked in a single small town in Korea. And they interviewed people in this town and made a social network, essentially who knows who and how many people had how many friends. Each dot in this little diagram is a person. And if you can see the little lines, well, that connects the friend groups. And hey, some people in the center have a lot of friends. And some people out here at the edge, unfortunately, not quite so many friends. And then they asked a lot of these people to get their brains scanned. And they found something kind of amazing. A number of these brain areas actually correlated with the number of friends in the friend network. So these little yellow dots represent parts of the brain that are bigger when a person has a bigger friend network. And in particular, this one shows the amygdala, which is a brain region that is fascinating. You may have heard of. It's involved in emotional processing. And it seems like as people have more friends, their amygdalas get a bit larger. So that suggests that maybe, just maybe, having more friends actually changes our brain structure during our lives, which is pretty amazing. But there's a problem, and isn't there always? We are currently suffering from what's been called an epidemic of loneliness. Between 1985 and 2009, social network size shrunk by more than a third. People just had fewer close friends. Right now, in the most recent survey after COVID, almost 80% of younger adults and even 41% of seniors who've had their whole lives to make friends, they report regularly feeling lonely. And, this is probably due to a lot of reasons, right? We have increased family distance. We have fewer community activities that seem to be going on. People are on digital social networks instead of maybe seeing each other in person. Of course, we had COVID and we all had to stay indoors for 2 years. All of these things have clearly taken their toll. But, loneliness and social isolation, well, it's important for all the reasons we just talked about. Loneliness increases the risk of mental health issues like depression and anxiety and substance abuse. It even increases the risk of physical ailments like heart disease. Remarkably, things like cancer and stroke and hypertension are all higher in people who are socially isolated or lonely. And in fact, it's been said that loneliness brings health risks that are equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which is really a fair amount of smoking. And of course, we've had a national campaign to get people to stop smoking. And some people have started to suggest we need a national campaign to get us more socially connected and engage with each other. And in fact, Vivek Murthy, who served as Surgeon General under 3 presidents, wrote a great book about this topic called Together, if you're interested in learning more about how important this is. Now, of course, here at Positive Science and BrainHQ, we think about mental health, we think about physical health, and very specifically, we think about brain health. And as we saw, loneliness and isolation can have big effects on physical and mental health, and maybe it's not surprising that they can have pretty big effects on brain health as well. These are results from a recent study at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. They followed more than 5,000 older adults for 9 years, and they asked them about their levels of social engagement and social isolation. And they found something kind of worrisome, which is that, hey, of the people who had the lower levels of social isolation, so more friends, more in touch with family, they went on to dementia at about 19.6% of them over the next 9 years, about 1 in 5, which is, more than we'd like, but not too bad in terms of a rate. But if they compared that to people who had higher levels of social isolation, those people with higher levels of social isolation had a 27% higher risk of going on to dementia. And that increase in risk is pretty meaningful. It's similar to the additional dementia risk that, for example, a lack of physical exercise causes. So it's important for brain health. Well, there is always a question with research like this. You have to wonder whether this is correlation or causation, like a chicken and egg question. Maybe social isolation and loneliness cause cognitive decline and dementia for all of the reasons we talked about. Social engagement feeds and activates the brain in important ways, and maybe removing that source of stimulation, might cause cognitive decline and then eventually later on dementia. But we don't really know from studies like this because, hey, maybe the arrow of causation goes the other way, right? Maybe as a person starts to experience the first tiny symptoms of a cognitive decline, they begin to withdraw socially. It's a little hard to go to a party if you feel like your brain can't quite keep up. And maybe you don't want to join a volunteering group if you're worried you might not be able to keep track of all the new names and faces. So maybe cognitive decline itself leads to social isolation and loneliness. Frankly, if you ask me, most of these things are a self-reinforcing spiral, right? They each probably contribute to each other. If a person is a little socially isolated, that might kick off a little bit of brain health issues, and those brain health issues might kind of reinforce and exacerbate the social isolation issues. So, of course, what we all want to know is, well, okay, that's something to worry about. Like, what can we do about it? Well, you'll be happy to know that scientists have been hard at work, and many other folks as well. And I just want to kind of talk through two pretty interesting studies that have been done about how to stay socially connected, particularly as we age. Because it's hard, right? It's hard to find new friends and activities as we get older. When we're younger, we're in school, we're finding a new job, it's pretty easy to meet people. But as we get older, it gets a little harder, without a doubt. So two interesting studies. First, there's been a lot of research into an idea that's called behavioral activation. And the idea with behavioral activation is that, a person first identifies their core values, like, hey, what do they want to be like as a person? And then they work to make a plan to take small steps to increase the time they spend on activities that are, well, related to those core values. And the idea is we can break down that big, overwhelming task, like I want to make more friends, into more achievable goals. And a key part is engaging in the identified activities, not worrying about whether you feel like it or not. It's like exercise. You might not always want to exercise, but it's good for you. So most times you go out and get some exercise. And the idea here is to treat social engagement the same way. Maybe you don't feel like seeing some friends today, but go ahead and do it. It's good for you. And after you do it, you're probably going to feel happy that you did it. So in this approach, coaches actually work with individual people to identify those values and activities. And maybe this is a little bit smaller than I'd hoped it would be, but this is actually an example from Mrs. N, who was a homebound, socially isolated senior. And she had a number of values that she wanted to engage in. She wanted to be more present as a grandparent. She wanted to be more connected to her community, and she wanted to live a more spiritual life, and she wanted to remain active, which are all wonderful goals. And so she worked with her coach and identified some very specific activities towards each one of those goals. One of them, for example, was, hey, she could go to the library and attend prayer meetings at her church. And she actually found a secondhand store to volunteer in. Now, all of these things she committed to doing, just like physical exercise, to keep herself and her social engagement good. And it worked. She actually engaged in those activities and reported much higher contentedness with her social relationships. And these scientists actually take this out and ran a randomized clinical trial. They recruited 89 older adults, and they randomized half of them into a treatment like this. And half of them just got a friendly phone call once a week, which is a nice control group. And they found that folks who took this planning approach to their social life, well, they actually showed big improvements in the number of social interactions they have and their level of social support. And they actually showed lower depression and lower disability as well. Now, what we don't know is, did it improve their cognitive function? But at least showed us that taking this active approach to thinking about your social engagement can help. Now, a second study that I think is just fantastic was a study around an idea called the experience core. And what happened here is that researchers put together a comprehensive program designed to engage people in volunteering activities that provided social engagement opportunities. We recruited seniors into a volunteering program and actually helped kids in elementary school learn how to read, which of course is fantastic. And the scientists ran this as a clinical trial where half the people got recruited into the volunteering activity and half got randomized and were asked to just wait a few months and do it later so they could serve as a control group. And what they found out was pretty cool. First of all, people who did the experience score actually improved their cognitive function. This is the visual memory score tests, and on the left is the control group, and you see their visual memory actually declined a little bit over this period, whereas folks who were doing this volunteering activity in the schools, they actually improved their visual memory, which is pretty fantastic. And they actually went a step farther and looked at brain imaging and found that as a result of doing the experience score, people who did it actually showed improved activation, this kind of blue spot up here in the frontal cortex, which is a really important part of your brain for thinking and planning and keeping organized. So really one of the first demonstrations that real volunteering, social engagement, probably some new learning here as well, and probably actually a sense of purpose in life, all can directly improve brain health and cognitive function. So that's just fantastic. I'm also a fan because my mom actually did this. She was one of the volunteers in Washington, D.C. back when they were doing this. So she took some of these tests. I think that's very cool. And even cooler is, hey, this program's actually still active. If you want to learn more, maybe you want to actually sign up yourself. It's actually run by the AARP Foundation now, and you can Google AARP Experience Core if you want to learn more, maybe even join a program in your area. So I'll wrap up, of course, by bringing us back to what BrainHQ can do for us. BrainHQ training itself can be an important part of using your brain. As we mentioned, having a sharp, healthy brain helps just about everyone and just about every kind of social situation. Maybe you can remember a name better, being able to be sharp in a conversation, just feeling upbeat and peppy. These are all important brain abilities that BrainHQ is designed to help with. So just regularly training on BrainHQ is a good way to have a healthy brain and stay socially engaged. One of my favorite stories from a BrainHQ user came from a woman who did a bunch of BrainHQ training and wrote to tell us that, she had gotten her sense of humor back because she felt sharper and faster. She was able to crack jokes when she was out with her friends, and she felt like she had become the life of the party. And what a wonderful benefit of a great, healthy brain that is. And BrainHQ also has a specific set of brain training exercises designed to improve cognitive functions related to social cognition. You can find these in the people skills section of BrainHQ. Face Facts is an exercise that helps train names and faces. In the Know trains your ability to listen carefully for social information in a conversation. Recognition helps you recognize faces when you're seeing them from different angles, like straight on or from the side. And Face-to-Face helps you recognize emotions, which is, of course, an important part of being and working with other people. All of these are helpful. And then I'll just finally wrap up and say, hey, at BrainHQ, we're actually doing something brand new this year related to social engagement. We're now offering online brain health classes. These are classes that meet by Zoom once a week for 10 weeks, and they're led by a great brain health instructor. And the classes cover how to use BrainHQ, whether you're a novice or an expert. And because the classes are live and on Zoom, they're actually a great way to stay socially engaged and meet other people from all over the country who share your goals of great brain health. I've sat in on a number of these classes, and they're very fun, meet a lot of people, talk about a lot of interesting topics, and build a great brain while you're at it. So I'll stop there. Thanks for listening. And if you have questions, as Stephanie said, what should people do?
So we have quite a few questions coming through already, and I'm doing my best to answer those as much as I can. But let's go ahead and transition over to our discussion between you and Mike. So I introduced Henry earlier, but I didn't quite do the full ditty on Mike. As you all heard earlier, Mike is the co-founder of Posit Science. He's the original brain behind BrainHQ. He has been a leading pioneer in brain plasticity for nearly 5 decades and has published more than 150 different articles in leading peer-reviewed journals. So as always, Mike, we're so delighted that you are joining us today, and really looking forward to hearing about what you guys have to talk about today.
I think you're on mute, Mike, so let's get you off mute and then we'll dive in. The first part of social engagement is
right.
Gotta hear what each other are saying.
For a minute, I was socially isolated.
Now, Mike, you're a very social guy, right? You've had hundreds of people come through your lab, including, very fortunately, me over the years. You throw an incredible Christmas party. I've had the good fortune to come a number of times. You regularly recruit an incredible number of your friends and neighbors to come and help you up on the farm.
Right.
So tell me, social cognition, social engagement, why do you do all that? And is it good for your brain?
Well, for us, it's always been an open door home. And I grew up in such a home. I grew up in a home where the door was always unlocked and open, and anyone that showed up was welcome to stay for dinner. and do something fun with the rest of us, whether they liked it or not. So, and that's what, so my wife Diane and I've set up our lives to be open and friendly to people, because to me, that's what life is about. Life is about connecting with other people, other human beings. It's rewarding for us. It's a source of continuous fun and entertainment for us. I like to say a home without people in it is just a building. But of course, we're able to do that. Everyone's not in such a convenient place to do that. And we have our children and our grandchildren around. Everyone doesn't have that opportunity. But almost everybody does live in a community where there are other people that would like to engage with them if they just knew that. And they also, almost everyone has neighbors. And you could say, create a home, always create a place where people always felt welcome, always were welcome, and always were treated kindly. And that's good for you, and it's very good for your brain.
That makes sense to me. And, that is kind of the paradox of loneliness. Often there's quite a few lonely people all living right next to each other, and they haven't quite figured out how to connect. It
is. And it's, and we understand on some level, and it's a combination, as you explained so beautifully, Henry, that, it's this interplay between how you're doing cognitively and how you're doing emotionally. One feeds on the other. When you're subject to cognitive decline, you're also going to be subject in parallel to social decline. There's going to be an interplay. So they keep one another. And one of the reasons for that, Henry, is because social interaction itself engages the machinery of the brain that supports learning, that supports change in the brain, that supports sustaining your brain health. Your emotional control is closely associated with the control of brain plasticity itself. So when you exercise yourself socially, you're actually exercising machinery that supports your health.
You're actually turning on the machinery that's helping your brain stay healthy. So
yeah, that's exactly right. And one of the beautiful things about that from your personal perspective is that you can control, to some extent, how often you deliver kindness in the world, or how often you deliver support to other people in the world. And you can richly exercise yourself. I try to do this on every occasion. When I take a walk in the morning, which I do every morning,
all right,
I try to greet other people that I meet on my walk with kindness and with consideration, with acknowledgement that other people matter to me. And in a sense, I'm delivering something to them that I think is helpful and hopeful to them, but I'm also delivering something to me. There's a selfish side of it. I'm exercising the machinery that supports me and my brain health and my social cognition.
Well, that's interesting you put it that way, because, almost every time we talk, Mike, you point out to me that one more thing that we're talking about, we should think about as a form of practice, right? We have to learn to do it.
Right, exactly.
A lot of people think about learning and they think, oh, I'm going to learn French, or I'm going to learn to play the trumpet.
Right.
But you think about social interactions as a form of learning. Do we have to practice our social interactions the same way we got to practice a language?
We absolutely do. And one of the things that happens if we don't is we turn into what's commonly known as the older curmudgeon. We don't want to, and a curmudgeonness or irascibility is a sign of approaching cognitive troubles too. Because so we want to, it's something that we want to be aware of. It's something we want to work on. And you've described a couple of wonderful ways that we can, in a sense, get out of our little box.
Yeah.
And slowly get back into the world where there's so many people out there that would like to meet us and like to talk, no matter who you are. You have an interesting story to tell them, and they have an interesting story to tell you. But you have to figure out how to get out there.
Right. Well, just like, so what should people do you think, if they feel a bit nervous? Like if I'm learning French, I might be nervous about talking French, right? I feel like I'm not that good at it. But if I'm nervous about interacting with other people, then maybe I'm not going to go out and interact with other people. So how can I get over that feeling of, okay, you know what, I'm just not feeling up to this today. I think I'll stay home and watch Netflix.
Well, you said you take the small chance. It's something that and there are so many people that would really like to have you with them. Like you described the experience core. What a wonderful notion. And what child is going to not be happy to have an older person with them who's cheerfully trying to help them in their struggles in accomplishing something like reading. I mean, and what great joy and fun that can be, again, to be among those young people again. Or how many people in your neighborhood could actually use a friend, okay, that you could provide friendship to them, that they would deeply appreciate. There are people probably within the range of your home
Right.
that would qualify for kindness from you. And every time you deliver kindness, you're exercising your brain.
Exactly. That's a great point you made. Don't think about it so much as, am I feeling nervous about social interactions? Think about, hey, is there someone out there who would benefit from me being in their life in this way? And almost certainly the answer is yes, just about anywhere we live, I would think.
And what you get back from them is almost always some expression of kindness or thankfulness in return. And that to you is rewarding. It's what we live for.
Yep.
You know, we're designed, Henry, our brains are designed to support our being a social species. We rely on one another.
Yeah.
Need one another.
Well, I know you've talked about that in the books you've written, like Softwired, about hey, when we're interacting socially with a person, they're actually becoming part of ourself in some way. Mike, is that right?
Exactly, they're growing into us. You know, first we grow ourselves. Our
Okay.
self-reference, we're the actor, we're the agent, we're the captain of the ship, we're the pilot, in charge. But then the other people that are important to us in a positive way grow into our personhood, and they're actually become part of us. They're
Wow.
part of us. We're enriched by our connections with other people. We're a member of the family of man. No man is an island. We're all a part of the stream, and this is literally true. Our brains are actually constructed to grow other people into other personhoods, you could say, into ours. And the people are close to it. I know that my dear wife and I, who's been my wife for 56 years.
Congratulations.
And I are in many ways as one. I mean, we're just
a little bit of Diane inside your brain, maybe a lot of Diane.
There's a lot of her inside. It's some of my best parts.
I've met Diane many times, and that wouldn't surprise me if that were true.
You suffer from the same punishment, man.
We're both very lucky on that front. We're both very lucky. I once heard someone tell me that that was their idea about how ghosts worked. That if you thought you'd seen a ghost, really what had happened is there was a little bit of your brain that was designed to representing someone else, and something had just tickled that little bit of your brain.
Yeah.
And so as a result, you felt like that person was there.
Yeah, I like that. I often feel like my wife is there every time reminding me not to do something that I know I shouldn't.
That is probably true. Well, she has been wonderful in that way. She's been wonderful in that way. So, well, do you have any other thoughts you'd like to add to our audience, or shall we move and take a question or two?
Yeah, I think I just want to say one last thing, and that is, I know that many people struggle with issues of loneliness and connection, but just try to get started with a little bit, take small steps in a positive way. And BrainHQ will help not just on the people skills exercise domain, but in general, you want to be as sharp as you can in your language skills. You want to be sharp as you can in reading visual signs and visual so that you understand where other people are coming from in a social environment. So that'll also help you recover your social savoir-faire. So you really feel confident in getting out there, and more confident in getting out there. And it'll also help you just connecting with other people. Yeah. So think about this more holistically as well, because stronger you are, the stronger your brain health is, the more you're going to be able to get out there and have fun again with other people.
Well, I think that was one of the most interesting things for me about going over all of this area of scientific research is sometimes, brain scientists, they think, hey, there's one specific part of the brain that does one specific thing, right? You and I have both seen these diagrams, lots of little dots. This one does that and this one does the other. Right. It seems like social engagement and social cognition is so important that it's really a whole brain activity.
Sure it is. Sure it is.
So much we can do. Well,
we're born for.
That's right. That is right. We're social from the beginning. Well, Stephanie, do we have some questions coming in? I think I do see a few in the queue.
So many questions. Also, a lot from my fellow introverts out there.
Hey.
A lot of fellow introverts are asking questions about, different methods for socializing. What if you maybe don't have as many friends? Is it better to have a couple of friends that you have deeper relationships with versus a lot of friends, like a quality versus quantity question? Do you have any, do any of the studies show any connectivity issues in the brain or differences in the brain between people that identify as introverts and extroverts? Lots of questions like that.
One thing I should mention is that when I was kind of going through my slides, I was a little bit loose in my language, and scientists actually sometimes distinguish between, social isolation and loneliness. And in many ways, loneliness is the bigger risk. And what loneliness is, of course, it's the gap between what we have and what we want. And to that end, there are people who can have very rich connections with a few people, and that's fine. They're satisfied. It's probably not causing them a brain health issue. Hey, feeling that lonely, feeling like there aren't people who care about you, feeling like there isn't someone you can turn to, that's probably the bigger underlying risk factor. I don't know, Mike, what do you think? Introverts, extroverts, they have the same brains or different?
Well, I think we would probably find differences if we looked in detail between people that are more socially engaging and active by nature and people that are more with themselves and in a sense happier with themselves. I mean, and I think a large part of this has to do with your level of self-satisfaction.
Right.
And basically how you view your own life, because there are all kinds of ways when you see your life itself as being an unhappy life. Generally, there are all kinds of negative neurological indications or conditions that can be contributed by that.
Yep.
And so I think a lot of it has to do with what your own perspective about it is. And
right. So if you're an introvert and you're engaged in your hobbies and you got those good friends and you're feeling happy, good for you. But sometimes people who say they're introverts, maybe they used to have more friends and they moved to a new city and didn't make new friends, or maybe they left school and weren't able to keep up.
Right.
And that's someone where I would say, hey, maybe that's something you should push yourself a little bit on, right? Just like we all need to push ourselves to go to get some exercise. I don't wake up every day and think, yay, I get to go to the gym. I wake up and think I should probably go to the gym today. You can treat
some
your social
people,
activities like that. Yeah, Mike.
With a small number of very close friends can lose them. I mean, people, sometimes your friends don't last for as long, they're not around as long, or they move, or they move to Florida, or the next thing you know, you're alone in upstate New York, and there's no one else. So your friendship community can weaken. And so, that's a time for you to think about how you can get out and reconnect. And there are all kinds of opportunities, almost every place in America where you can begin initially small things to make that reconnection. Lots of people would like to see you involved in activities they're supporting in your community. And you could contribute a positive way again in your community in all kinds of ways, or in your neighborhood, or in your church, or in lots of other ways you can reconnect. And I strongly suggest that you think about how you can do that in your own life.
Yeah, great question, Stephanie, for the introverts of the world. Thank you.
Yes. We also had quite a few people writing in, with quarantine. A lot of people were getting their social engagement through Zoom, through Google Meets, through these online hangouts.
Right.
And they've been reaching out via texting and emailing, maybe more than they were before. Does that qualify as social engagement? Are those connections as strong as, relationships with people that you're having in person, or do we have any science about any of that yet?
Mike, you want to take a swing at
Well,
that?
sure, it's positive. Of course, it's positive. It's not as good as having a cup of tea or dinner with them, but it's positive,
Yeah.
and it's a little bit more controlled. So it's not quite so open. You can't whack them on the shoulder or pat them on the back, but it's in the right direction.
All right.
And it's a way to extend connections with people that might be difficult to extend connections with. I mean, obviously, it's a wonderful thing to be able to connect regularly with your children or your grandchildren or your nieces or your nephews or someone else that matters to you, like an old friend that no longer can be in your community. So still try to sustain those connections, because keeping up with them and them keeping up with you and knowing their story and providing in a sense, a now remote shoulder to cry on, it's a good thing for you and for them. So of course, sustain your connections if that's the best you can do, or that's what, that it's a positive thing.
Yep.
It's just that whenever you can, also have them over for dinner, for God's sake.
Yeah, and I hope that we're coming to a time, I agree with everything Mike has said, of course. And I hope we're at a time now where, hey, some of those Zoom friends that maybe are around you, now it's time to say, let's get together for a cup of coffee and exercise a few of those muscles that I think for many of us have atrophied a little bit during COVID. So back to that idea of maybe a little bit of extra push for each of us is a good idea.
I also have a habit, Henry, and my habit is that whenever I talk to someone at a distance, I always end the conversation by saying something like this. Well, gee, I know you'll probably be coming to San Francisco. It's not too far in the distant future. And I sure do hope you come and stay with us for a day or two. So, and my wife and I make sure that we always have the bed made. And I like to say the bed is always made and there's a good cook just upstairs. So, and the rent is very, very reasonable.
That has worked out well over the years. I have seen it.
Yep. All right. So we've actually had a couple of parents or guardians who have written into us about their children who are on the autism or Asperger's spectrum.
Right.
They are wondering if you could talk a little bit about the science behind socialization skills for those on the spectrum, and is it a good idea to try and encourage them to try and be more social? And if so, in what ways should they go about approaching that?
Yeah, Mike, I know you've thought intensely for decades about children and brain plasticities and neurology. How are you currently thinking about autism?
Well, there can be improvements, and there can be one of the things that people need to understand is that commonly children are much more socially aware when they're autistic, although the problem is in their social expressions. So they can actually have quite deep positive social feelings and interactions for their parents and for other people in their family that they actually have a deep attachment to, but they don't express themselves very, very strongly in that direction. So commonly the parent misunderstands the level of the depth of that love, of that feeling. And so they should understand it, of course. And then, of course, the child can be variously engaged. Now, I worked hard to try to improve the sort of neurological operations in their social and other behaviors in children like this. And it's a struggle, but actually improvements can be made, and children can open up more and more and more as they get older in life. And maybe not in a way that everyone understands, again, because they have these issues of expression. And but you know, I know a number of adult autistic individuals who have a very positive and happy life. Well, happy, very positive and self-fulfilling, self-gratifying life, and that's the goal. The goal, and many of these individuals are ultimately quite successful in life in their way. So.
You know, I think one of the ways that maybe we start to think about these kinds of conditions, Asperger's, autism, a bit from a brain perspective is, you know, for many kids as they grow up, social interactions, you know, become one of the most important things around them. And a huge part of brain power gets devoted to that.
Right.
Other kids, hey, they take a different course for any one of a million different reasons. I think we're starting to understand now. And that brain power that previously went into certain aspects of social cognition, it's still there. These kids have got lots of brain power in various ways, but it becomes, you know, attached to other things. And hey, to some extent, we want to, you know, intervene early. We want to help those kids' brains develop so they can, you know, operate in society and all these kinds of things. But I also like to think that over time in society, we're just going to have a bit more kindness towards people whose brains develop in various different ways.
Right.
And we're going to appreciate all the things that they can bring. And we're going to understand that, hey, just like all of our bodies are shaped a little bit differently, we're going to gain some better understanding that all of our brains are shaped a little bit differently.
Yeah, a person can be quite socially limited, but can be a marvelous, incredible in other respects, of course. Could do things that we can never do. You know, can be a great artist, could be incredible, you know, in mathematics or in some other incredible skill level that we could never approach.
Yeah.
And can have a wonderful, happy, self-satisfied life doing that. You know, so it's different from us, just different from us, which is just fine.
And then within that, you know, hey, everyone's brain is going to be plastic throughout their lives. And, you know, the kids that I've seen who've gone through this, who've had fortunate enough to get a lot of, you know, advice and coaching and help and love from their parents, you know, developing and turning out just wonderfully.
Right.
No one is ever done building their brain. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
Exactly right. Exactly
As
right.
a person who is also neurodiverse, that is always encouraging to be reminded of, for sure. And I hope that everybody will also take that to heart. A little bit of kindness goes a long way. All right, so we have a lot of people who are very interested in the fundamentals of BrainHQ class. Henry, can you very quickly talk about how often those are occurring? Are they occurring at the same time each week? How people can sign up for those?
Sure, I'm delighted to hear it. I mean, one of the reasons we put together the class is, hey, we recognize that we've got a great brain training program, but what a wonderful opportunity to build a socially engaging class around it, where people can get together and learn more and talk about more aspects of brain health. So the way the class works is it's a 10-week class. It meets at the same time each week. We usually start a new one about every 2 weeks, and we try to kind of mix up the day and the time that it comes on. So if you look at the schedule and you don't find one that suits your schedule, we'll be adding more, and you can take one later on. And when you join the class, it'll be the same group of, brain health students like you who come to the class each week. We have a wonderful set of instructors, typically people who've got great teaching experience around neuroscience and cognitive science and psychology from local colleges and community colleges and places like that. And hey, the classes are about brain health, right? They center on BrainHQ. If you're an expert BrainHQ user, you'll probably learn a few things and you might teach a few things. If you're new to BrainHQ, hey, they're a great way to really get started. But they also talk about all kinds of information about brain health. You'll learn about neuroscience, and you'll learn about brain plasticity and how the brain works. And you're going to learn about the role of physical exercise in brain health and nutrition and sleep and all of these other things. Because, hey, the brain's a complex organ, right, Mike? And it takes a lot to keep it sustained and healthy. But most of all, you're going to meet people like you who are interested in brain science, interested in brain health, and, hope you'll make a few new friends along the way. So you can learn more. Hey, just email us if you want to learn more. You can always email us at support@brainhq.com. If you want, you can also go directly to the website, which is www.brainhq.com/classes. Maybe we'll try and put that in the chat here in a minute if people want to see it. But we're really excited about putting this together. So I'm glad there's some interest.
Yeah, more and more people are signing up, and people really seem to enjoy it. And why wouldn't they? Because everybody can, and generally, is interested in learning more about their brain, and so it's fun. I enjoy the lectures myself. So
yeah,
cool.
They've been great.
All right. So I think we probably have time for one more question. Can you talk about, is there any science sort of exploring the effects of parasocial relationships on the brain, especially now where so much of our media is consumed online? A lot of people seem to be developing these parasocial relationships. Can you speak to that maybe a little bit?
Stephanie, you're a young person. For those people who may not really know what parasocial means, why don't you tell us what a parasocial relationship is? And then we'll talk about the brain health implications of it.
Sure. So a parasocial relationship, as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong as the neuroscientist in the room. So it's the understanding that you as an audience member kind of have this feeling that you have a friendship or some sort of kinship or connection with somebody on the other side of the screen, either a YouTube video or a media celebrity, whatever the case may be, because they've been vulnerable in some way or they share a hobby with you. And that is kind of a one-way street, and that can be awkward for people sometimes. So that is how I kind of understand parasocial relationships.
Great description. You're not just a fan of George Clooney, but you've decided that you are friends with him a little bit more.
Right.
Not so much about him. So I don't know, Mike, is that a good thing for the brain because it's at least it's some kind of social connection, or is it maybe bad because it's like an illusion?
Yeah.
Passing all these difficult questions off to me, Henry. I don't think that's really fair.
I'll take a swing at it if you like. I'll take a swing at it. I think of parasocial relationships as fundamentally unhealthy in the sense that they're like a visual illusion, right? We've all probably seen a visual illusion like, the Escher staircase, where you look at the staircase and every stair looks like it's going up. And our brain is being tricked by that, right? And hey, they're fun to look at. You can have an Escher print on your wall. It's not going to be bad for your brain health. That's all okay. But I think a parasocial relationship where you've kind of crossed that line from, hey, I'm a fan, to, hey, I really feel like if I met this person, we would be best friends, right? I think that's unhealthy for the brain fundamentally, I think, because it is like an illusion that you've built for yourself. And because in the end, it's going to consume time that, hey, probably you could spend on a more real social relationship, which would actually be good for your brain health. So
Henry, I think that's really cruel advice, because I've always imagined I was always a little bit like Superman. Come on.
all right. Well, a little bit is okay. You heard it from Mike.
Yeah.
So great question, though. A great question.
Yeah.
It is fascinating how, as technology evolves, we come up with more brain health issues than we used to. I don't think our ancestors in the Stone Age and their 150-person societies had quite so many concerns about parasocial relationships and their brain health.
No, and then I'm sure there's going to be a lot of science going forward, about how that is changing our brains over time, and it's just too soon to tell. And it's a fascinating field.
Definitely, we're designed to be, there's a big movement to draw us into this more and more. It's to connect us in an unreal world. It's called a metaverse, right? Where we're so absorbed in a sort of virtual world. And to my mind, there's a kind of danger in this. And the danger is that we need to sustain a connection with real people in our real world. For one reason, because real people in our real world are unpredictable. And generally, people presented as to in the media are so predictable. It's such a I wouldn't want to say anything about the movie star, but commonly they're sort of a canned and sterilized image of a real person, and not a real person exactly. And we need to deal with the surprises, and we need to deal with the constant adaptation to what it means to be a real friend and a real companion to other human beings on the planet.
And that's probably the core of the good brain health that comes out of it right there. So
right.
Great question. All right.
All right. One last comment from Ruth here, not so much a question, but talking about how, Mike, you're so welcoming. She says, could you all three come to Pennsylvania sometime soon? You can stay over and I'll feed you well.
That's great. Hey, I'd like her
All
to
right, Ruth.
step too, Ruth.
Send that to support@brainhq.com. I am out in Pennsylvania every now and then for working with health plans and all kinds of things. So that would be wonderful. Thank you for that kind offer.
Yes. All right. So I think let's go ahead and wrap it up here. We went a little long, so thank you everybody for sticking around. So our next available webinar is going to be on March 15th. That is an office hours webinar about how to track your progress within BrainHQ. We'll send out webinar invites a week beforehand, so keep a lookout for that. Once again, this webinar today is being recorded and will get sent out to folks next week in a follow-up email. It will also get posted to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/BrainHQ, if you want to subscribe there to be notified as soon as it goes up. Henry and Mike, do you have any final parting words that you want to share with folks?
Keep training with BrainHQ, and hey, go out and have some fun with some people you haven't met before.
Do somebody a favor, and you'll be doing yourself a favor.
Beautiful thought. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Stephanie, thanks for hosting us today.
Thanks, of course. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.